Today we're going to take a look at some of the different shots you might experience in the field, and we're going to start with the heart shot. I'm wildlife artist Ryan Kirby, and I've worked really hard with some of the top whitetail biologists in the country to make sure that my art and the information here is presented accurately. All this art comes from my whitetail physiology and anatomy print available at ryankirby.com. So by far the most lethal shot on big game is the heart shot. In general, an animal needs to lose a third of its blood supply to die of hemorrhagic shock or blood loss. And so obviously the heart shot is the best way to do that. The heart is surrounded by a bundle of nerves in the heart sac. So when you hit those nerves, it's going to cause that deer to mule kick or bronco kick. And that's the best way to identify a heart shot. When that deer's hit, they'll mule kick and they'll sprint away, but likely they won't make it very far. Most often they're going to fall within sight of your deer stand. So here's what your arrow is going to look like. It'll be covered in crimson red blood, possibly bubbly. Remember that the heart sits between the lungs, so you'll often hit a lung as well, especially if you're shooting from a stand or a quartering away shot. The lungs are going to provide that extra bubble on the arrow. But crimson red blood, lots of blood, a true heart shot results in a very heavy blood trail and an almost immediate recovery. And we're going to go to the lung shot next as we work our way back the body of the whitetail deer. So when you hit a deer in the lungs, you're going to hear a loud thwack, and the buck is going to run off, but likely not make it very far. Pure lung shots are easy to identify on an arrow. The blood is heavy and frothy with small bubbles from the oxygen-rich lungs. The blood is pinkish red with little or no odor. A double lung shot will result in a dead deer often within 100 yards of your stand. So a double lung hit is really easy to recover. It's a great shot. You'll know it when you make it. It's easy to recover and the best case scenario for you. A single lung is a little bit more tricky. So when you shoot a deer in the lungs, what happens is the lungs collapse and they cannot provide the oxygen in the blood that the deer needs to survive. When you hit a double lung, that takes that out immediately. When you hit a single lung, which can happen on a really steep angled shot or a really hard quartering shot, the other lung is still functioning. And unless you hit a major artery or a vein within the lungs, that deer can keep producing oxygen and it'll keep it alive for much longer. When a double lung is hit, you're looking at like a 30-minute or less wait time. On a single lung hit, though, you're looking at 6 to 9 hours just to be safe. So if you think you've hit a single lung, make sure you note the buck's direction of travel when he leaves, and then back out. Do not spook him. He'll likely bed within 200 to 300 yards, maybe even closer, of your stand, and will expire there in his first bed as long as he's not spooked. So be careful with this one. So another aspect of the lung shot is the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a thin muscle that separates the chest cavity from the abdominal cavity, and the goal is to assist the lungs in regulating the air pressure of the chest cavity so that they can expand and contract. A lot of times on a quartering shot, you're also going to slice the diaphragm, which is a bonus. It is always a lethal shot. And so keep that in mind too, that if you may get one lung and a part of a diaphragm, that's going to help you a little bit more than just one lung on its own. So now we're going to work our way back the body. We're going to move out of the vitals and into the abdominal cavity of the liver. So the liver is a very slender organ that runs mostly vertically in the buck's body, and it's part of the abdominal cavity. So it's treated more like a gut shot than a shot inside the vitals. You'll know a liver's hit when your arrow hits the center of the body and you hear a loud thwack. The buck's going to run off, but probably not far. Liver shots are fairly easy to identify on the arrow. The blood is very dark. It's going to be possibly bubbly if a lung was hit, or gritty if a gut was hit, which often occurs on angled shots. Remember, the liver is a very thin organ, so most times when you hit it, you're going to hit other organs as well. The blood trail is spotty and sparse, gradually declining as the trail goes on. On a liver shot, there's always a chance that you're going to hit one of the arteries or veins coming in and out of the liver, which would result in a much cleaner, faster kill. But you're going to really want to treat this like a gut shot. On a liver shot, you're looking at 6 to 9 hours. So again, pay attention to the direction of travel. Do not spook the deer. Do not go in too early, and don't bump him out of that first bed. That's going to be your best chance of recovery on a liver shot. Next, we're going to continue to work our way back and look at the abdominal cavity or the gut shot. On a gut shot, you're going to watch your arrow enter the animal further back than you like. It's a gut-wrenching feeling, but it happens, and what you do next is critical to the recovery of the animal. On a gut shot, the deer is going to react very quickly, probably sprinting away for a short distance and then stopping, arching its back, and tail flicking back and forth, and it's going to walk away. Here's what your arrow looks like on a gut shot. The blood will be brownish red or even green with partially digested food and other stomach matter. There's going to be a rank odor from the stomach and or the intestines. And there's also not a lot of blood in this area of the body cavity. The deer carry a lot of fat in their midsection. So the arrow is going to be wiped fairly clean as it passes through the fat and hide on the exit wound. So do not expect a lot of blood on this shot. Gut shots are really tough, and the blood trail is going to be very sparse. Oftentimes, if you on a steep angling shot with a low exit wound, the intestines can even plug the exit hole, which even further limits the blood. There may not be any blood at all. So you got to be really patient here. You got to notice the buck's direction of travel, mark the last time you watched him, and back out. You want to get down, do not spook that deer. He's likely going to bed and expire in his first bed within 100 to 200 yards. So if you're patient and you don't spook that deer, your chances of recovery are very good. If you bump him out of that first bed, though, the chances of recovery go down dramatically because of the lack of blood. You really don't know which direction they're going to travel. So back out, pay attention, and if you have one available, call a tracking dog. We've seen some great stuff with them being able to recover deer that are gut shot or have iffy hits. So if you have one of those, highly recommend it, but be patient and stick with it. You'll likely find your deer. So a big question a lot of people have is meat spoilage on a gut shot deer or deer shot back further in the abdomen. And that is an issue. You know, obviously you want to recover the deer as quickly as possible. You don't want to waste anything. And that is an issue for people, you know, early in the season or in the deep south when you're hunting in hotter temperatures. One good thing to think about, though, is that the animal has not expired yet. So, you know, if you shoot a deer in the morning or even in the evening, it probably is still going to be alive throughout the evening. And then those cool temperatures are going to cool everything off. And so if you go back in the next morning, you could still recover that deer early when it's still cool. The biggest thing you got to realize, though, is that that deer will likely expire in its first bed. And if you go in too far and too early and bump that deer out of its first bed, that deer may run a long ways and it's probably not going to bleed a lot, and it's probably going to bump out of that bed before you get close enough to see it. So you may just hear a crashing in the woods and not find any more blood or see a direction of travel, and you probably are not going to recover that deer in time for the meat. So if you bump it out of that first bed, you're not going to recover anything regardless. So your best bet is to make sure that animal is expired before you go in to try to recover it. Now we're going to take a look at some non-vital hits and start with bone. A whitetail skeleton is made up of 327 bones. And the biggest one that causes issues for hunters, especially bow hunters, is the shoulder. There's a couple of really heavy bones in there, but the biggest one is the scapula. That covers the largest area. It's not necessarily that thick, but it can cause some issues for bow hunters. So it's best to pick your shots carefully and try to avoid that one. So except for a deer hit hard on the spine, which will cause the animal to drop and likely require a follow-up shot, if you hit a deer in the bone with an arrow, it's likely not going to be a lethal hit. What you're going to see is you're going to see very little penetration, a lot of the arrow sticking out of the animal as it runs off. You might see some tallow and hide and maybe a little bit of blood on the arrow or a very faint blood trail. Sometimes the arrow shaft will be broken off just above the broadhead. Sometimes you'll recover your entire arrow, but you'll get very little penetration, very little blood, and it's not a lethal hit. The good news is deer are insanely tough, and a lot of times they will take that and survive just fine, and you may get a shot another day. Muscle is also a tricky one. So very rarely does an arrow that does not enter the body cavity of the deer result in a lethal kill. But anybody that lifts weights knows that big muscles like a deer have require a lot of blood flow. So there's a lot of blood, arteries, and veins that flow through the muscles of a deer. One of the biggest ones is the hindquarters. There are some very large arteries that run into the back legs, the hams. And if you hit one of those, that's a very rare gift. You will follow a very heavy blood trail right to your deer, but you never want to aim for those. Neck and lower leg shots very rarely result in a clean, ethical kill. So you always want to practice, shoot your bow, shoot your gun, and be confident in that, and realize that body cavity is where most of the work is going to get done. Neck shots, shots in the ham, shots in the lower legs are very bad, and you really want to avoid those because they're not lethal. So in closing, we've gone over every organ throughout the body of the whitetail deer and what to do if you think you hit that organ. And now we're going to talk about some just general overall tips of trailing deer and how to find your buck. So one important thing to remember is that deer are very tough. They can run up to 35 miles an hour. And so if you shoot a deer even very lethally, very well, and that deer runs for 20 seconds, it can go up to 300 yards. So even a very well hit deer can get out of sight, especially in thicker areas. And what you do after the shot can really determine your odds of recovering your deer no matter where it was hit. The first thing is to watch the deer intensely after the shot. This is something I have a terrible time with, and especially younger hunters that get really excited. There's a lot of adrenaline, a lot of things going on. And what you want to do after you make the shot is watch that deer's body language. Whether that deer sprints off the entire way out of sight, or runs 50 yards and hunches up, or beds down, or immediately drops from a shot to the spine. All these things are really important to help you know what to do after the fact. So try to stay calm and really pay attention to that deer's body language after the shot. The next thing is to mark the exact location that you saw the deer last. Pick out a tree or a stick or a blowdown that they passed. Deer don't always start bleeding immediately, and you may have to go to that spot to start your blood trail or start tracking that deer. And if you look away and you just have a general idea of where that deer went and not an exact spot, you're going to have a harder time. So try to mark the exact spot the deer ran away. If you are on a blood trail, it's best to go really slow and go blood to blood. So find a spot of blood, mark that, and before you go on any further, find the next spot of blood, and then the next, and then the next. You can walk 5 yards in the wrong direction, and that can completely throw your blood trail off. And then what you have to do, inevitably, you always end up coming back to the last blood. You look a little bit more closely and you realize, hey, that deer took a left turn instead of a right. So if you can, on a very sparse blood trail, try not to move forward too fast. If you kick over a bunch of leaves or you mess up the blood trail ahead of time, you're setting yourself up for failure there. So try to go very slow, pay very close attention, and find blood before you take your next step. And the biggest one we've always heard is when in doubt, back out. So if you are in doubt, back out of there. Deer will most likely expire in their first bed or two. And if you leave them and let them alone and let them be comfortable where they feel secure, most times they'll expire there. But if you go in too far and too fast and bump that deer out of that first bed, your odds of recovery go down dramatically, and you've set yourself up for a long day tracking in the deer woods. So when in doubt, back out. If you feel good about the hit, the deer's still going to be there no matter what time you get in there, and so be patient. So I hope you found all this art and information helpful. I've worked really hard with biologists from the NDA to make sure that everything that I produce here is accurate and can help you guys out. So be sure to check out the NDA, the National Deer Association, and support them. If you want to buy some of this art for your own hunt camp or man cave or office, you can do so at ryankirby.com. Hope you guys have a great fall and this information helps you. Be sure to check out ryankirby.com and enjoy your time in the woods.